So we've done a lot of work with keyframing already, and one of the things that helps make keyframing a little bit more realistic and adds a little bit more character to your to the way things move is easing. So we'll talk a little bit about spatial easing, and we'll also talk a little bit about temporal easing. It's the kind of thing where it's worth pulling it down in most of your motion graphics and testing it out to see if it's the right fit for you. I'd say most of the time it's a really good fit, and it tends to add quality to something, but every once in a while you really need something to be what we would call linear. So we'll take a look at that and examine what the difference is, and you can determine stylistically what works best for the composition that you're working on, right? So we'll look at our composition here. I set up a composition and I have our airplane from earlier in the composition, and what I can do right now is I can position it and I can ease the position quality, the position attribute. So I have position here, and as you can see, if I manipulate the position property, I can go back and forth, right? We're pretty cool on that. We understand how that works. So if I want to make this fly across the screen, it's fairly straightforward at this point. I can take it and I can put it over here. I can keyframe it at the beginning, right? If I'm doing it forwards. But I can also keyframe it at the end here, right? So I can have it basically do a flyby, fly off of the screen. Maybe I can have it fly a little bit upwards, and here we go. See? Plane is taking off, which is kind of cool. But what if I wanted to have, well, I don't know, what if I wanted to have it do a couple of different things in here, right? So what if I wanted to have it kind of bounce off of a waypoint? I can click it and I can drag it in the middle of the timeline here. And look, it automatically does put a keyframe in there, right? And interestingly enough, we're looking at this spline here, which it's funny that we should see splines again, because we talked about them when we were working in Illustrator. Look at this; it made a spline just from the position attribute. So if we pull it along here, you can see that we're already easing automatically along the spatial plane. So let's see what that looks like. It looks fairly realistic. I mean, you know, compared to if we did this linear, which we can. So in order to change what we would call the interpolation of it, which is another fancy word for does it ease or does it not ease, we right click on the specific keyframe, or we can do this with multiple keyframes if we want, if we shift select all of them. However, I can right click on something from the context menu, I can select keyframe interpolation. So from spatial interpolation, I've got something called continuous Bezier, which is what we're seeing right here with the handle, right? If I change that to linear and press OK, you'll see what we end up getting. It's taken that curve out of our spatial path. So let's preview it now and see kind of how it goes. See, it's kind of got that bump in the middle, which may or may not be what you're after, depending on what your intended effect is, right? So I can go ahead here and I can go back to keyframe interpolation, and we'll turn that back to a continuous Bezier. And we're back to smooth motion, right? And it eases on and eases off on the spatial scale. Interestingly enough, if you remember our discussion about handles and anchor points, this is a spline like anything else, so I can actually go in here and I can manipulate the spline to get it just right. So it's the kind of thing where I can watch it over and over, and if it's not exactly the way I want it to be, I can go back in and I can tweak it. So I can even tweak these handles, right? Which is something that we could do in Illustrator. So I can grab onto the handle and I can have it dip and then go up and then go down if I so desire, right? So you can have it do something like that. And that's fairly simple to do. It's just a matter of visually manipulating it here right in the composition window. So it's pretty simple. Through a pretty simple act, you can get some easing, which I would still say looks at least a little bit more fun and a little bit more realistic than just doing linear keyframes. But sometimes you may want linear spatial keyframes. So that's how easing really works on a spatial level. You can manipulate it here in the composition window, and you can set it on and off by right-clicking on the keyframe here and going to keyframe interpolation. You can change the spatial interpolation, but we can also change the temporal interpolation. So we're going to talk about that in a minute, and we're going to go to the graph editor to see what's going on there with temporal interpolation. Okay, so let's take a minute here to talk about easing the temporal aspect of our animation. First, we've got our plane again, right? Instead of doing spatial interpolation, which is it's a fairly easy concept to grasp. You can see it, you can see the splines, you can see all that stuff. Temporal interpolation, it's a little bit harder to grasp. So when we ease the temporal aspect of our animation, it's a little bit tougher of a concept to grasp. So luckily though, we've got this graph editor here, and the graph editor will help us visualize that a little bit better here in just a minute. So let's set our plane up to actually come in and do a landing. I have the position. I'm going to go to the endpoint where I want to go. I set the position, but I want to start maybe off screen here, right? So here we go. We're scrubbing it, and here it is. It's coming in for a landing. Well, here's the problem. It comes in and it stops on a dime right here, and that would be, well, it would be linear interpolation. So if we right click on this, we know we can go to the keyframe interpolation menu, and yeah, it's on linear interpolation for the temporal interpolation. So one of the ways that, though, you can adjust it through here, and it's a little bit tough to see the effect when you adjust it through here. I can't exactly explain why. Maybe somebody out there may have a good answer for that. But the way I like to adjust my temporal interpolation is I actually like to do it visually here through the graph editor, which is really just a different way of looking at keyframes. So we're used to, at the moment, we're used to looking at them. There's a dot here and there's a dot here, and they've got a relationship to each other somehow. We're used to looking at keyframes in that fashion, which I'd say 9 times out of 10 is a really helpful way to look at it and understand it. But sometimes you need to know, when you need to know about the easing of these on a temporal scale, let's go to the graph editor, and it'll provide you a whole different view of how this works. Well, this is more about the speed. You'll see up here, it's a little bit tough to read, but this says 600 pixels per second, right? And this is basically keyframing the speed of something, right? So let's go ahead here, and we've got these really handy options. I can go ahead and I can select this one particular keyframe from here, and very easily I can do ease in and ease out just by clicking on these little doodads down here. Easy ease. So I can easy ease on the up and the down. I can easy ease in and out. So this is something you can just play with, and you'll get a good idea of how it works just by playing with it, right? So I can take that. I can maybe convert that to, you can convert it to an audio Bezier. You can convert it to a linear. You can do all kinds of different things with it. But for the moment, we've got easy ease, right? So we're easy easing. I think we're easy easing in and out. So what this allows us to do, let's watch the difference now. Very nice. See, it comes in for landing and it slows down. And let's see how that works on the graph editor. Right, so see, when it comes over this loop here, it slows down, which I would say looks a little bit more natural and might serve your purpose a little bit better. So instead of getting that chunky linear motion, well, you can go ahead and you can make it come in, and sometimes it'll benefit you to give you a more natural or a more realistic motion, or something that at least has a little bit more emotion to it, or something that is at least a little more, a little more fun, something that has a little more character. So combining that with spatial easing, I can go down here now, and I can actually have it, land, right? So I can add a little bit of a curve in here, like would be like a real landing. So there we go. Simple enough, right? It slows down and it kind of comes in, well, semi-realistically, right? At the very least, it looks cute. So here you go.